Hello everybody, and welcome to Some Patches Required, a show where we hope to educate and entertain you on the ever-turbulent games industry. As always, I am one of your hosts, Aaron.
And I'm your other host, Zach.
And this week, we're diving into a pretty fun topic for me specifically, which would be sort of the role of the games journalist and the critic in today's modern world. And our framing device for this one is the Super Mario Galaxy movie, which I and Zach both saw in the theatre, and have some thoughts on, and that we will elucidate on momentarily. But before we get into all of that fun stuff, of course, a hearty thank you to all of our new listeners. If this is your first time aboard, welcome. We hope you enjoy what you hear, and if you've stuck it out with us up to this point, we really appreciate that too. It's been wonderful to have you along for the ride. If you would not mind altogether just sort of collectively hitting the engagement button on your platform of choice, just giving us a like and a follow and all of that fun stuff, and then also, if you don't mind too terribly and it's not too much of an imposition, share the show with a friend, a family member, or as we often like to say, a mortal enemy. Regardless of who you decide to share it with, it is genuinely our best way of growing as a show and getting in front of some more people. So we really appreciate that every time you can lend a hand in that regard. But yeah, beyond that, if I'm not terribly mistaken, Zach, you saw a Mario.
I did. Unlike you, who is a whole movie skipper. And by that, of course, I mean, I don't believe you've seen the Super Mario Bros. Movie from 2023. I've seen both of them, for better or worse. And, ultimately the reason that I proposed that we do this was because apparently there was some online discourse, as I'm sure there often is, where you've got situations on Rotten Tomato where the critic score is significantly lower than how, well the audience score is, or the audience thinks the movie is. So, for example, with actually both of the Super Mario movie, the critic scores were about, 40 points under what, 30 to 40 points under what the audience felt the score should actually be. And so there was a bunch of discourse, as there tends to be on Twitter, and this was just a good excuse to really have a discussion around what is the role specifically of critics in general. I'd say the majority of this is going to be more film and games based. Yeah,
we're probably not going to be dipping into like ballet all that much. Zach, I'd love to hear your thoughts on, Banksy and whatnot. But yeah, I mean, generally we're going to be talking about mostly movies and games. But yeah, it felt like there might be some relevance to us just sharing our thoughts on these movies from like a semi-critical perspective before we dive all the way into the discourse and whatnot. But Zach, you've slandered me terribly, because I did take time out of the only life that I get to watch the original, not the original. We did watch that, and we did have an episode on it at one point, but the Super Mario Brothers movie from 2023, I did watch in what I can only assume was its intended format, which was with copious and repetitive ads on Fandango at home on my cell phone.
That is pretty awesome, and I do remember that being my experience in the movie theater as well. I believe those ads are, in fact, in the movie.
That's unsurprising to me. They felt fairly integral to the overall experience, in my opinion. But yeah, no, I'm a full-on Mario scholar at this point. I've seen both of these bad movies, and I'm really happy to talk about them now.
Yeah. Well, that's beautiful. I think, and you've also, you've just let everyone know what your opinion is without really diving into the consequential details.
Yeah, which is really the role of the critic, is to just, throw my opinion around with absolutely nothing to back it up. No, so I actually do think that within the context of this larger, not even breakdown, but just sort of discussion around the role of critics when it comes to trying to indicate the quality and value of an experience, I should wear my sort of, not influences necessarily, but my proclivities on my sleeve here. I think, Zach, you're not an uncritical person, but I think it's probably reasonably safe to say that of the two of us, I tend to be a little bit more of an asshole about it.
Wow.
Maybe not an asshole, but I do watch movies and play games very critically. Obviously, I used to review movies and games very actively, and generally speaking, I was not ever a huge fan of nostalgia for the sake of nostalgia, or anything in that vein. Star Wars burned itself out of my good graces with the Kenobi show. And I'm still heartbroken over that. But the reality of the way that I tend to watch movies is I am just generally very critical of them. It's part of the way that I enjoy watching movies, to be 100% honest. Synthesizing the media like that brings me joy. Trying to solve it like a puzzle kind of is fun for me. And then if the movie itself is clearly not working for me, latching on to the things that are not working and trying to map out why they aren't working becomes an enjoyable, sort of fulfilling way for me to mine pleasure out of a movie that might otherwise not be delivering to me those sensations. So yeah, it was with a fairly critical eye that I did sit down to watch the Super Mario Brothers movie and the Super Mario Galaxy movie. And I will let you kind of elucidate your approach here as well, if you would like, before we do some minor, for my point, just sort of ranting and raving about movies in general for a moment.
Yeah, I think I definitely don't have as critical of a lens that I view film through. I'd say that I can be more critical on the video game side of things, depending on what the context is. But, I like my Taco Bell. I like my sloppy garbage on occasion, and can even, dare I say, call it good, at least in the case of Taco Bell. And also, candidly, I just go to movies that I know are going to be bad ahead of time. For the sake of going to the movies. I think going to the movies for me is a very therapeutic experience. So in general, I can enjoy something even if I don't think it's the best thing ever. Now, that being said, I feel like honestly my hottest take with this movie is that I heard so many negative reviews about this film from pretty inconsequential critics like Moist Critical. There's some other YouTubers that are definitely not, aligned with the Academy by any measure, right? We're talking about people that are generally just going to movies to again, have a good time, enjoy it, look at pretty color, whatever. And a lot of them were way more critical of this film than I think was maybe even to a degree necessary, but it is definitely in my mind not a great film. And I do think it's got largely the same issues that the first one had, which is it runs so fast. The pacing is so fucked with both of these movies. It's I don't even know how to fully explain it. It's you're in one scene for 5 seconds and then suddenly it's another scene. And so as an adult, it's a very kind of hectic experience. I will say though, to its credit, that the visuals are quite good. And specifically, the one thing that I thought they did a really good job with is I actually think that Bowser Jr. looked very, very cool. I actually really liked his inked up design. Whenever he roared with his little mask on, I thought they did a really good job with his character design. So there are certainly things in this that are very solid, but like I said, much like the first film, pacing is super fucked, and they also just I'm trying to find my notes specifically for this, but it's like nothing really happens in the movie.
Yeah.
like truthfully, we only have, I feel like, 5 minutes with each of the characters, which clearly you don't. The movie's got like an hour and 30-minute runtime. But like the craziest thing is Rosalina, and I never played the game that this is based on, but she's like barely in this goddamn movie. So it's very odd. Like I think she literally has like 10 minutes of screen time.
Yeah. They really wasted Rosalina. They did. But
and with a big budget actor, Brie Larson. I mean, I guess everyone in this film candidly is like fairly big budget, but
yeah. You're not wrong. I'm trying to hold back until you are largely done unless you want me.
I mean, I think you can feel free to jump in. I kind of expected you to candidly already. Oh, the one thing I will say, sorry, real quick, is a few reviews referred to this movie as Jingling Keys the movie, which, I kind of see. I think I'm a little bit less in line with that criticism specifically, but I will say, because you brought it up when you were explaining kind of what you're into with film and whatnot and what you're not into, this movie definitely does do a hell of a lot of cameos for the sake of cameos, and I think some of them are largely kind of inoffensive, but it does feel a little bit like, here, look at this thing that we just referenced from Nintendo. Don't you want to clap at that? And it's like, I mean, I don't know.
Yeah. Okay. So, I think I have like a collection of individual thoughts that all sort of like illustrate my thought on this. The first thing being that when I got out of the movie, I did text you, Zach, and I think I described it as a colorful headache.
Yes, I believe that was your phrasing.
And I stand by that. The other two ways that I have described my reaction to this movie, or like the sensation of watching it, I described the sensation of watching it as like a full-on urgent sprint into my own open grave. And also I think I said that I would have hated this movie if it was art. Was the other thing that I ended up saying about it. So yeah, I was not a fan in particular of either, to be honest with you, Super Mario movie. I think the first one is serviceable. I think it's completely fine as a product. It is inoffensive in the extreme. The pacing is still way the fuck in its own way. No, there are no jokes in these movies because the dialogue is always in such a fucking hurry to get to the next line, the same way that the movie is in such a hurry to get to the next thing, that there's no time to actually set jokes up. People just yell things at the screen and then move on and hope that there was enough energy present to warrant a reaction from somebody somewhere. So I'm trying genuinely to think of a single instance of like clever or memorable writing across both films together, and I do not think there is an example of that. That having been said, none of what you're looking at is offensively bad. It is inoffensively mediocre, which brings me to my big problem with the first one and the second one, just sort of like as products, which is that they are very cynical, cold products. They are very cynical, cold products. This is a Nintendo trying to do brand diversity, not like diversity in the sense of representation, but diversity in the sense of let's diversify our portfolio and move to another vertical, right? There's only so much money in games. Let's bring it to a film audience, and then that will increase merchandising. That's really what we're looking at from the Nintendo side of things here, and Illumination is a studio whose services can be bought. They will do licensed work because they do these screamy Dr. Seuss movies as well, and the Minion movies are just screaming. So it's that kind of product, and it shows that it's that kind of product. This is not a passion project for anybody. It's not the dearly held fondest hope of Uncle Shigeru, and he's just finally living out his filmmaking ambitions on the largest scale. No, it's not that. Nintendo knows that there's a lot of fucking money to be made here, and this is a lot of them doing brand management. And so the movies come out inoffensive and fine. Great. So other symptoms of soulless corporation stuff. The entire voice cast is unnecessary. Every single person in it is a big name actor, none of whom have a fucking single iota of distinction between their voices. Chris Pratt is doing a discount Billy Crystal impression. Charlie Day is doing his Charlie Day thing, and everybody else just seems to be yelling. No one has like a distinct voice or a distinct character. Everyone's just very nondescript, bland, milquetoast, approachable voice people. With the exception of Kamek, who seems to be doing like an original sort of like Dracula sidekick guy voice, Renfield, the original Renfield, sort of thing, which is very, very fun. But that's miserable. Like you said, the pacing in Mario Galaxy 2 was great. By which I mean it was a fucking nightmare, because nothing in the movie that happens matters. It's just a sequence of sequences, all more or less in service of these really flashy visuals, which I think everyone can pretty unilaterally agree are beautiful, right? Like the animation in this movie is gorgeous, but it's also completely soulless and unmemorable. I have absolutely no attachment to any of the characters. I never really picked up a great deal of emotion from any of them, and the action sequences were all extremely forgettable, partially due to the pacing, but also just because the movie is so visually noisy. There's just always 100,000 things going on in any given frame, and no frame is ever lingered on for longer than a second and a half, so there's no room for anything to make any impact or the visual identity of this movie to come in together in any sort of cohesive, coherent way. So yeah, it's a production mess made for cynical reasons, and that to me doesn't feel great to watch. I do recognize fully that the movie was not made for me, but that doesn't mean that it does not have objective balancing issues, and that it does not end up feeling largely soulless, at least by my estimation, right? So then the last thing that I will kind of just wave my hand at before we move along is this movie is so filled with cameos and Easter eggs and whatnot that I actually, Zach, am surprised you were able to parse a lot of what was going on, having not played Mario Galaxy 1 or 2, both of which are great games, like phenomenal games. Very light on story because they're Mario games, so it makes sense that they need to theoretically come up with their own story to base these on, because you can't really just do what they did in the games, because it's every bit as simple as Bowser captures Princess Peach, and Rosalina and the Lumas basically help you guys help each other so that you can all go and save her at the end, right? And that's it. So obviously they were going to need to come up with something else, and they arguably didn't but come up with anything to fill out the plot of this movie, but instead just sort of threw references into sequences where things happened and people fought, and there was lots of jumping and the camera moved around a lot, and nonsense just kind of cascaded from all four corners of the screen. But again, I think the Easter eggs in this, Easter eggs in things tend to work when they are in service of something and when they are used sparingly. Clearly, they are the flotation device by which this movie did not sink to the bottom of the ocean. There's very little to this movie other than references to the games. That's really all there is to it. Because, again, the plot of this thing is so light as to be non-existent, and the rest of it is just noise to try and stop children from falling asleep.
Yeah. I mean, I will say for me personally that I actually think that the action sequences were quite well done. I think that
They're
the
well
problem,
choreographed.
yeah, I mean, I think the real issue is that like the majority of the movie to some degree could be considered action sequences, and so you don't really get any time to like catch your breath for the most part. And then yeah, no, the pacing side of things I think is mostly just funny to hit on one last time, because it's like if you really think about it, especially for like the Mario, Luigi, and Yoshi kind of track, they do like functionally nothing at
God,
all
no.
during this movie. I mean, technically no one, like everyone kind of just goes on like a little chore, and then it's enough chores that come together to build a certain like a single narrative. Yeah, I don't know. It's truly a I mean, it is a kids movie. And it's
Yeah,
not
but
kind of shy about any of that. But what I will mention, because we'll tie this kind of into the larger discussion here, is that one of the criticisms levied at a lot of people that were reviewing this movie or critics of this movie, not necessarily people that are being critical, but literal critics, right, is that people are saying, well, it's a kids movie. Like, what did you expect this to be? Like an Academy Award winning film? And I'll just say my quick thought, which is kids movies can be good. We've seen it. For example, Puss in Boots, The Last Wish, is a phenomenal movie. If you haven't seen it, you absolutely should. And that is certainly a kids movie. I mean, it's in the Shrek verse, I guess, is what you would call it. I don't know. But regardless, it's in that area. Or you could even, candidly look at like the first two Shrek movies, which are also very much kids movies, but are to this day, and I would say even without nostalgia, great. You know what I mean? Like there are kids movies that can be phenomenal and well received. But that's I'll let you say your thoughts.
There are a ton of great kids movies, and they're not even all like older examples. It pains my heart to say that Toy Story is an older example, but I mean the movie's mid 90s. But yeah, I mean, Toy Story is like a genuinely good movie with a ton of heart. Toy Story 2 is a genuinely good movie with a ton of heart. A lot of those early Pixar movies, just, they were so not pandering. And it's not, even to me, necessarily the idea that a kid's movie needs to have enough stuff appealing to adults in order to make it palatable to critics. I think that's a pretty disingenuous argument. It does shine a light on some of the disconnect, which is, and I'm getting a little cart before the horse here, but some of the disconnect comes from adults trying to apply their own lens to a movie not technically made for them, will result in some dissonance between what its intended audience expects and wants and what, an adult might think about it. There's obviously going to be that, but you don't need to have your movie be adult oriented or even filled with things for adults in order to make it good. Otherwise, again, a lot of those original Pixar movies would not necessarily hold water, right? And go to a more recent example, like the Lego Movie is a genuinely really good movie. It's made for children. It's an animated movie about Legos where the whole point is like save the world and build cool shit. And it works because the writers and the directors of that movie found like the nugget of like good, earnest honesty and like heart in what Legos mean to people, and made that the core of their film. In this one, there is no core of the film. The core of the film is the noise. This movie is what happens when every single character in your film is the guy who loves spaceships from the Lego Movie, also voiced by Charlie Day, who just yells about spaceships. They use him as like a comedy punctuation in the Lego Movie, but he's every character in the Mario Brothers movie, just to like paint the dichotomy there. But yeah, there are 1,000 good kids movies, and I understand that the barometer, because I had to stop myself for a minute there earlier when you were saying like, a great deal of the Galaxy movie can be chalked up as action. And like, yes, by runtime, I would bet you dollars to donuts about 2/3 of the movie is action. And my first thought in my head was like, oh, there's ways to do that well, though. You've got your John Wicks, you've got your Mad Max Fury Roads, which are basically just protracted action sequences that also have really strong character work and really strong world building and really effective pacing and memorable action sequences that aren't just like more visual noise. But then I realized both of those are R-rated action films directed at adults, not children, right? So for me to even make that argument and say, well, you can bring that into the kid space would feed into this unnuanced Twitter argument that this is for kids. You're expecting it to be for adults. Why do you want The Godfather? Why do you want Shawshank Redemption? Why do you want, Mad Max Fury Road in a kids movie? It's a kids movie. It's inoffensive. They're not getting, brainwashed into thinking this or whatever it is. It's a kids movie. It's a kids movie. It's a kids movie. That doesn't absolve it of its sins, in my opinion. I'm sorry. I think we can, as a society, we should expect more of our children's entertainment than noise.
Yeah, I mean, certainly I think you can be critical of kids' content. I think it's ridiculous to, especially in the age where like people spend so much time on TikTok and with shorts in general, like to suggest that it's not appropriate to be critical of the things that we're putting in front of our kids, I think is absurd. Like, it seems like the only time where people have any kind of universal agreement of what's okay to put in front of kids or not okay is when it becomes like potentially like pornographic. That seems to be the only thing we care about, because candidly, I feel like we have a much more acceptable view of like violence in front of kids and what's like condonable, at least in the US. I feel like the US is generally speaking just like really scared of anything that involves touching. But all of that aside, because that's ultimately not the point here, I do think that you can be critical of kids movies, especially where, we've seen that there are plenty of examples where you can have original, interesting, fun movies. I actually think the Lego movies are a really good shout out, specifically because I can't remember, because I haven't seen it in a while, but it doesn't really have super deep themes, if I remember correctly. And I do know that that tends to be like an Academy thing. Like, they really like these like deeper themes that you can find in like Puss in Boots, The Last Wish is all about like accepting death, right? Which is a very deep thing. Or like, I know a lot of the Toy Story movies are actually a lot deeper than what they might appear, right? Well, I don't think the Lego movie was particularly deep. It's just like well done.
Yeah, the Lego movies, its depth was very accessible to kids, in my opinion, right? Because the nugget of that movie is the idea that the instruction manual is great, but what really matters is your creativity and the fun you have with your own imagination. The idea that Lego bricks are a physical embodiment of a child's wonder at the ability to just build and create boundlessly and unlimited by anything other than the confines of their own creativity. That's the nugget of the Lego movie. It sounds very easy and it sounds very superficial. It does feel a lot deeper because of the way that it is executed in the film, but yeah, that's like your messaging for that movie, which is, again, a very bouncy, friendly, child-accessible concept.
Yep. No, definitely. Well, looking at the time here, I mean, really, the beginning of this was just kind of shedding the light on why we're discussing some of these things, which is because of this discourse that, I'll say it, is ultimately not very important. About the role of critics and what score should be actually considered when you're talking about what the real score for a movie should be, at least on Rotten Tomatoes. Should it be the critic score or the audience score? I think in reality it's probably somewhere in the middle, but we'll get into that now by chatting a little bit about what is the role of critics and reviewers as it pertains to, video games and film. And I guess as part of this transition, right, we'll just bring in what we normally talk about, which is the game side of things, because obviously we've been talking exclusively about film, but there's a lot of criticisms levied at games critics and reviewers for being, any myriad of things, like not good enough at the game to be able to play it, or not in the target audience for the game, and therefore maybe they shouldn't be reviewing it, and all of these different kinds of things. And I guess what I'll just say as we're going in, Aaron, even before we even say like what is the role, I think a lot of these criticisms get levied because there's a fundamental disconnect between like the target audience of the product and the reviewer themselves. Right? Like that's where I see a lot of these disconnects. Like if you've got all these Academy reviewers talking about Super Mario Galaxy, they don't think about it from like a parent's perspective when they're reviewing it, because to your point earlier, they're trying to put it in this like very specific lens that they have. And I feel like it's that disconnect that ultimately leads to a lot of these discussions and disputes and whatnot.
Right. Yeah, no, I would agree. I think okay, so the big issue here is the tendency of platforms as the venue that we have for some reason collectively decided to have our conversations on, by which I mean, Twitter, right? The platform, Twitter, Facebook, Reddit, what have you, right? The platforms that have become the public forum for conversation they exist to demolish the concept of nuance. Nuance dies on Twitter. And unfortunately, a conversation about what is the role of a critic versus the role of an audience member and whose opinion on the quality of any given entertainment product, that entire argument lives inside of a big bubble labeled nuance, because there is no black and white answer. There is no one person is right and the other person is wrong. You're right, there is a disconnect. There's always going to be a disconnect. Art is in its entirety and by design subjective. So yes, you're going to have that problem. There are going to be people who disagree with your skill level playing a game. There are going to be people who say that you're a paid shill. There are going to be people who, 1,000 different other things. The way it breaks down to me is more, and this is not even close to a perfect metaphor, and I'm kind of building the car while I drive here, so bear with me if this does not quite work. Okay, so let's say that the Super Mario Galaxy movie is whatever the sugariest cereal on the shelf is, right? Kids are going to absolutely flock to it. They're going to love it. It does not necessarily mean that it is good for them. It does not necessarily mean that it is an objectively good representation of food. But it is food that they will love to consume. The role of the critic is to say, hopefully from a nuanced perspective, children will love to eat this cereal, but it is devoid of nutritional value. Whereas the audience version of it is to say, I really liked eating this cereal. That's more or less where we find ourselves, in my opinion, in terms of like, maybe not what the role of them should be, but which roles do they fill? That's about as close as I can get.
Well, so I did you skim through, it's not a very long article, but that giant freaking robot article that I kind of randomly found?
I did not get a chance to go through that one, no.
So I actually have no idea what giant freaking robot is. So I was mostly just kind of online looking for what people thought the purpose of critics were to, inform my opinion a little bit more. So it wasn't just purely vibes. And I actually think that article does a really solid job of explaining what I think the role of critics ultimately is, and kind of further illuminating where there's an issue, which is to say that I think the role of critics is to, be critical of the work and express whether or not they like the movie, and not necessarily assess the nutritional value of it, but utilize their unique filter, their unique perspective to hopefully shed some light on, what you might or might not like. I think where the failure happens here, and this gets referenced in this little article, is people take shit way too, serious. If people, if there's a critic and they say, I don't like the Super Mario Galaxy movie, a ton of people will take that really personally if they did it, and then they'll get pissed, and then they'll start being a dick about it. And it's weird. So that's like one stage where there's kind of a failure. And ultimately, where I'm going with this is I do think a lot of the failure actually ends up happening on the audience part, because I think we've forgotten that, really what reviewers are about is I think you've probably find a reviewer that has similar taste to you. And then you're like, okay, well, X reviewer really likes this, so maybe I'll like it. And that's the point of having so many different critics and reviewers, right? Is that there's a myriad of taste out there that you can look at to properly or more accurately assess what you might think of a film. The problem is that Rotten Tomatoes is an aggregator of a bunch of different critic scores. And critics are going to think more critically than a normal consumer because that is their job. So the score will be lower. But there's probably some very glowing reviews of the Super Mario movie that are more focused on parents and people with kids and whatnot. So instead of getting mad at critics at large, maybe your goal should be to find a critic that resonates with you. Because by God, I mean, there's 100% going to be content like that on YouTube that you can find, or
Guaranteed.
even websites that are tailored for parents and kids. So like, I think that's the biggest problem is people are looking at all critics equally when it's like, no, you have to find the critic that matches your taste. And actually the Giant Freaking Robot article has this really good quote, and he basically says it's up to the consumer to filter their own taste through what a critic says. And I think that that's 100% true. He basically says this isn't a ruler, it's a barometer. I just thought it was a very smart article in how he went about it. So yeah, those are kind of my general thoughts on all of it.
No, I would completely agree with that. I think that and I don't think that even stands in like opposition to what I'm talking about. I think that that's more or less what I mean. I don't literally mean the nutritional value of a movie. I mean, obviously not literally, but I mean the broad swath of critics are going to apply the same general set of expectations. Does the plot make sense? Is there, good character work? Is there clever writing? Is blah, blah, blah. All of these things that would constitute for me the nutritional value of a movie. Is it enjoyable? Is it just broadly speaking this? Right. But, and then like you said, every single critic will then apply whatever their critical lens is to a film in a different perspective based on their own position within life, within the socioeconomic landscape, within the hierarchy of critics, within the family structure, within, 1,000 different things. Who's their audience? Who are they trying to make their audience? So the worst thing that aggregators have done is feed into that social media illusion of a binary. Right? The idea that there is a black and a white, a set of good guys and bad guys, a series of right answers and wrong answers, a series of haves and have-nots, and there's no room in the middle between those two extremes. So there is now no room in the middle between critics as one singular entity and audiences as one singular entity, disregarding the fact that 59, 43, whatever percent, critic score is made up of potentially hundreds of individuals, and the audience score is made up of God only knows how many specific individuals. It's not literally one camp versus another camp. This is not an organized endeavor unless it is one of those, and those are usually fairly toxic when executed on like Metacritic. Mm-hmm. So yeah, I completely agree with you. The landscape of criticism is so wide open that you can and should find critical voices that align with your needs, with your wants, with your likes, with your expectations as an audience member, and then don't treat, critics are not court. Critics are not legally enforcing anything. There's no governing body of them saying, and we, the critics, twirled our mustaches and decided to hate on the galaxy of Mario. That didn't happen. That doesn't happen. Critics are not a monolith up against which audience members need to throw themselves in order to topple an evil regime. It's a series of people with their own opinions. So yeah, no, I agree with you on that front. And then just one other kind of little note inside of that is that I'm actually no longer 100% convinced that the argument between, or like there's any real difference between straight up journalists, game journalists, and online video game commentators. who basically serve the same function in 2026. There's really not that much difference between those things. So the quality of the journalism across the board may have dipped, in terms of who is considered a critic, because you don't just have trained journalists, but also that does increase that diversity of perspectives angle, where you do now not just have 4 or 5 or 6 or even 10 major print publications sort of dictating the discourse from a critical perspective. You have critics who are community members of a very active sub-community. You have critics who are still, our big print media people. We saw this a lot with like Crimson Desert, which was another game that recently came out and absolutely split the shit out of critics and audiences. And there are 1,000 different nuanced reasons for that, up to and including scheduling issues with the review codes and review embargoes and stuff like that. And also, patch schedules. But none of that gets factored in to the argument when people are angry that critics didn't review Crimson Desert very well. But again, you have some commentators on the internet who hate on it to hate on it. And then you have some legacy print people or not even legacy print, but like modern print people like Paul Tassi from Forbes who absolutely loved Crimson Desert, right? So yeah, there's a whole world of traditional media outlets and non-traditional media outlets for you to peruse to find an opinion that jives with your expectations.
One quick thing that I wanted to hit on, you were talking about there maybe being a disconnect between critics and viewers. I actually think, at least based on some of the data that we've seen, that disconnect may not really be there. I mean, it is there in the sense that critics are more critical, but if you look at the 2 Super Mario movies that we were talking about earlier, just because it's the data that's in front of me, Super Mario Bros. 2023, which was generally considered to be a better film, has a better critic score than Super Mario Galaxy. The same is the case for the audience score, which is to suggest that critics do appreciate movies more that audiences like more. So like, it's also like there's not this, disconnect in like a literal sense. I mean, the amount of enjoyment they get out of it might be less. But again, I'm still, by kind of using that framing, suggesting that there is a monolith there, and there's not. I will say the interesting thing that I've thought about, and actually the reason I haven't said games journalism, is I, was reading through some articles, and, I guess I'll frame this as a question to you, because I've never really kind of questioned it before. But should we really be talking about people that purely review video games as games journalists? And that's not to question what their skill level is, because there's a lot of skill that goes into writing a meaningful review of something, right? But I this is one thing that I'm just curious about your perspective, because from my understanding, when I think of normal journalism, right, like let's take the entertainment out of it. Like what Jason Schreier does, or even what Paul Tassi does, I think is solidly games journalism, because, in the case of Jason Schreier, he's literally got contacts. He's doing exposés. He's, talking about game development, all of that stuff. I think Paul Tassi does another really good job. But like, let's look at, I'm going to say, the Angry Joe Show, for some reason, is what's like coming into my mind. They do like reviews for film, and they do reviews for video games. I think it's fair to call them a critic, right? But like, would we call them games journalists when all they're really doing is playing a video game and then giving their opinion, even if it is thoughtful, right? Like, I'm not trying to belittle the craft of what they're doing.
No, it's a taxonomy issue.
Yeah. I'm just curious, because like, I think we largely, at least in games, we loop all of those things in together, but like, no one says that a film critic is a film journalist, right? Unless they're doing a similar thing to, Jason Schreier and whatnot. So, yeah, I don't know. Is there any other thoughts you have on that? That's just one thing that's kind of come up through this whole process.
No, it's a really good thought, actually. No, I would completely agree. I think that there is a pretty significant difference between being a journalist and being a critic. I think that being a critic can be a component of being a good journalist, And I think that good journalistic practices can result in better criticism, but I do not believe that being a critic qualifies you as a journalist. No. I think that because, especially in games, the entire just sort of sphere of people who are paid to talk about games is called games journalism, it does soften the definition of journalism in a pretty significant way. So I do think that it's kind of an issue of taxonomy, right? Like, it has been mislabeled as journalism because it takes place in an industry that we colloquially refer to as the games journalism space. And also because, so many of the biggest outlets obviously do both, and they do not necessarily have dedicated critics who are not also doubling as journalists within the context of, your publications like your Kotakus and your IGNs and your whatevers. Whereas, especially during the time when these sort of roles were being codified, you would have had full-time theater critics. You would have had full-time film critics. You would have had full-time music critics. And there still are roles for that. They're just fewer and farther between. But now, in order to, exist in the current era of, online media, you have to wear so many different hats that there is, a lot more bleed over there. But yeah, I mean, broadly speaking, I would say that a show where the point of or a show or a publication where the point is the criticism of the media, whatever that, art piece of media may be. I almost said article of media, maybe, whatever that may be. If that is the purpose of the show, then right, that falls firmly under criticism, but it probably does not qualify as journalism. Yeah, so I think it is a mislabeling issue.
Well, and another thing on the game side, as we've been having this discussion, that I wonder how much it feeds into some of the issues that players have with, games critics or games journalism, is that, let's take, like a publication like, or website like IGN, right? Where IGN, I have no idea how big their staff is that's doing writing, but, they've got limited amount of resources. And it's fair to say that they probably can't have an employee that's like a fan of every single genre of game and like good at every single genre of game. And so where I'm going with this is like, one of the things that gets levied a lot, or criticisms that gets levied a lot against games journalism and games critics, is like, they're not a part of the intended audience for X game. So why are they reviewing it like it's almost like it feels kind of like an entitlement thing, right? Like, you shouldn't be reviewing this Dark Souls game. It tends to happen with harder games, I think, or things that like people label as like hardcore. They'll be like, you're not good enough to be reviewing this game. You can't understand the intricacies and deeper systems here. Why are you doing it? And regardless of the validity of any of that, I think anyone can provide feedback on a game, even if they're not in the intended audience. I think it's ridiculous to suggest that you can't. But I wonder if part of the problem there is like, most of these outlets, they have no way of having someone in every single niche of a, game genre that exists, right? Like, that's just not really feasible. And so that's probably why we do sometimes get reviews where people maybe don't get the game in the way that like the target audience does. But regardless of any of this, it all goes back to the fact that you need to find someone that you trust, what they're saying aligns with your interests.
I would say that, like, broadly, the way that I tend to consume my media criticism, I have probably 3 or 4 different camps of places that I'll go to. I have my guys on YouTube that are gonna have their kind of acerbic opinions because it's funny. You've got your more populist examples. IGN will review a movie, and they're a decent bellwether for like what a middle of the road review is gonna be. For games, I always tend to gravitate a little bit more towards your Kotaku style reviews, because they've dropped, and they had dropped as of a very long time ago, their actual review scores, because review scores themselves are a very reductive way to try to objectively gauge the quality of an experience. And so they went with a more nuanced angle, which is we're literally just going to break down what we think of it and not apply an objective score to it, because that objective score could change in an afternoon. So there's that for a little bit more nuance. There's your Paul Tassi's and whatnot. So like there's 1,000 different things like that, right? And I tend to go to 3 or 4 different camps to try and gauge what the vibe is about something, especially if it's either extremely divisive or the critical reception tends to be extremely unified. Something like Breath of the Wild when that came out, or like Elden Ring when these games come out and they're just these gigantic, monumental successes critically and commercially. Trying to see where people land on the spectrum is a valuable thing, but that requires a little bit of effort on the part of an audience member to sort of parse the criticism to find the stuff that resonates with them. And it's a hell of a lot easier to just get really angry on Twitter and call everybody woke soy boys. It's just easier to do that. So that's what we see a lot of.
I mostly think that's kind of funny because in the age of like YouTube, especially, like you can find critics on YouTube that agree with your taste opinion, which I think is valid, and political opinion on how media should be written, for better or worse. So like, it's not hard to find solid content for you in this day and age, I don't think. Even with like the increasingly, the increasing amount of like garbage, trash, AI content on a lot of these platforms. Like I personally don't have issues finding new people that are talking about games in ways that I might appreciate or not appreciate. So especially in the game space, I don't think there's any lack of people giving their opinion. And I would argue actually probably even more so in the film space, there are even more people, I'd have to assume, that are stating their opinion, because I know in terms of podcasts, I mean, I know just from us doing this, that's like the majority of podcasts have to be film review podcasts or talking about film. Yeah. Like it's truly crazy. Yeah, I don't know. I hope people aren't just like going to these websites and every time that they see that, an IGN or something like that hasn't agreed with them because they have no ability to like look at other reviewers, they're like, my God, I fucking hate like they're basically just amping themselves up every time.
Oh yeah,
they go back
to the comments.
Yeah. That's so dumb. If you know it's going to piss you off, why even go to it? You know what I mean? Like, why go to Kotaku? Why go to IGN? Any of these game review sites if you know that you're just going to disagree with what they're going to say?
Because people feed off of that. I mean, truly, that is the answer, regretfully, is that people feed off of that kind of anger and vitriolic cycle. They want to get in there and they want to really show the person who wrote that article, who's boss. And then someone else is going to leap to the article writer's defense, and then the original poster is going to get angry, and then they just it's like they're powered by it. It's the fuel they need to go and be rude to people in the real world. It's incredible. I have a great deal of joy looking at that. But yeah, I mean, I think we're probably coming up closer towards the end of the time here. So I guess my sort of closing salvo on this would just be to say, generally speaking, to audiences who seem to be very angry about critics not agreeing with them, it's okay. The critics can't hurt you. They're not going to come for you, and clearly they're not swaying the direction of filmmaking in any meaningful way. Otherwise, all movies would be made exclusively for critics, which is evidently not the case, because this movie seems to be in addition to just a gigantic, cacophonous mess, it is kind of a gigantic middle finger to critics, because it's just not meant to review well. Like I can't fathom that was a stated goal for this movie. By the time that they realized that this was the cut they were putting in theaters, I can't fathom that they thought this was going to land well with critics, but they knew it would perform well with kids. And you know what? Should we be expecting more of our children's media? In my opinion, yes. Is it okay that this is an inoffensive 5 out of 10 movie? Yeah, it's fine. There's nothing egregiously wrong with it. If I had gone to see this movie with my own 5-year-old child, I'm sure that the two of us would have had a fine time. I'm sure that the child would have loved it. I'm sure that I would have had a better time because I was there with my child. But does that absolve it of its objective failures as a film in the same vein that any other film is a film? No, it does not. Can both things be true? Yes. Is it okay for you to have your opinion and let others have theirs? Yes. Is it more important, even, that a critic like the movie than that you, an audience member, like the movie? No! It's wicked not more important. It's absolutely not more important. Your own enjoyment is the thing that should matter the most to you. So if you liked the Super Mario Galaxy movie and you want to tell me to fuck off, that's fine. I welcome it. I'd be happy to engage in a conversation with you about that. But again, I'm not telling you you're wrong. I'm just stating my opinion. And that's the whole fucking point. It's okay to disagree. It's okay. It doesn't have to mean anything bigger than that.
Yeah, I mean, I think this really is one of the rare situations where it's like people are too sensitive that I actually agree with. I think it's just one of those things where it's like people are so conflict averse sometimes that anyone telling them that they might be wrong for enjoying something is like such an affront. Except you got to remember, like, a reviewer is not actually the... I mean, maybe. I'm sure there are some reviewers that have literally said, like, if you enjoy X movie, you must be a troglodyte or something. But for the most part,
right.
I don't think the majority of reviewers are questioning like how smart people are that like X movie or like whatever it is. Like, it truly is supposed to be a statement of what their opinion is. Don't take it too personally. And also find people that are writing and enjoying the same content as you, because that's going to be a more accurate reading of what you will and will not like. And there are critics that truly service like every single type of person out there, because there are so many critics at various levels of, you know, speaking skill and writing skill, I'm sure. So there's someone out there for you. Yeah, and I mean, truly, I don't think that there's anything else that's like super important to talk about. This isn't like a very important, you know, critical story, but it is kind of interesting whenever there's drama to kind of double click on it and figure out, you know, well, not even figure out anything. I kind of knew what my perspective was. Really, it's more just having a conversation around the larger discourse can sometimes be a little entertaining, I think.
Yeah, no, I would say so, and I would say that I'm happy. I'm happy I watched these movies. I didn't like either of them, but I am happy that I watched them. It was fun enough. It was fun enough, and it gave me an excuse to talk about some of my favorite things, being get angry a little bit about movies and talk about like the role of criticism in the larger media landscape. I think that's an enjoyable conversation to have whenever the opportunity arises. And again, I think it's always kind of worth reminding people that what's happening on the internet is not the most important thing in the world, usually. That's weird to say that it isn't not always the case, because it is 2026 and sometimes very important shit happens on the internet now. But yeah, if you like the Mario Galaxy movie, that's fine. It's fine. I'm assuming, I'm not going to make that joke. I was going to say, I'm assuming that you took Advil beforehand, but that's rude.
No, I did not find it actually very painful at all. Like I said, I actually ended up finding it less painful than I kind of anticipated, because I think a lot of the people that I watched made it sound way worse and less tolerable. But it ultimately was not an overly painful experience for me. But with all of that being said, you know what's absolutely not a painful experience, Aaron?
Is that the fine works of E. Dougie Art?
Well, it's Moss Cat Market.
By which I mean Moss Cat Market.
Yeah, I mean, you know, it's fine. Just butcher our beautiful. I almost said sponsored. They're not a sponsor, but they did help us with our album art and a lot of our initial artwork for the show. So of course we support and appreciate eDougie Art. They are a great friend, and I meant Moss Cap Market. It is an early recording, y'all. I apologize. Aaron, what else do we appreciate?
Man, I don't know about you, but I certainly appreciate the wonderful bits, boops, bops, and tunes of Beach Girl. And Beach Girl is, of course, the provider of our exceptional intro and outro music, which you can hear at the front and back of every episode of this podcast from the beginning of the time that we started doing it 100,000 years ago. You can also find Beach Girl's music on Spotify, SoundCloud, Bandcamp, and a handful of other YouTube, other places. In slightly less volume than you would have at one point, but it is still very much present and still very much worth your time. So do feel free to go check out Beach Girl and treat your ears.
Sweet. And with that, we must be agone. So with that, I will say adieu.
Indeed. Goodbye! Like a full-on urgent sprint into my own open grave.